Thanks for listening to the Drummers Weekly Groovecast. You can contact the show at twitter.com/DW Groovecast and through Facebook at facebook.com/Drummers Weekly Groovecast.
Good evening.
I am warning you right now, if you touch my drums, I will stab you in the neck with a knife.
Ain't a funky. Ain't a funky. Mom!
Take it easy. Lower it.
I'm not gonna lower it. I have to do this now.
I don't mind you playing it, but lower it.
Well, we get straightened out?
No, we had a problem. I mean, we tried to do everything we could.
What do you mean?
Well, you know what I mean.
Next!
Little trouble there. You're rushing.
Yeah, well, you know, that's just like your opinion, man.
Happy Monday, John.
Four more.
All right. 4 more it is. No, just kidding. But, you know, John's right. We step on Philly every week, and we hear about it every week. But seriously, we're back again. Happy Monday, guys. And going to start off the show with just a little brief in memoriam today. We have the occasional drummer go on to his great reward, and we wanted to, or in particular myself, I wanted to give a quick bit of acknowledgement to Leonard Hayes, who passed away this past week. He was the drummer for the great San Francisco Bay Area band Y&T. He was a direct descendant from John Bonham. He was one of these guys that played in that great hard rock tradition, played big old Ludwig drums just like Bonzo, superphonic snare drum, had incredibly fast foot. So I just wanted to give 1 minute of praise to the great Leonard Hayes.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
A really underrated band.
Absolutely underrated.
Like in a sea of crap, they were pretty exceptional.
I'll tell you, man, that guy that was the leader of, or still is the leader of the band, Dave Menichetti, the guitarist and songwriter singer, is absolutely one of the most unheralded and underrated guys in that genre.
Yeah. He made the mistake of living in San Francisco instead of the Strip.
You got that right, man. Yeah. So anyway, guys, moving on. Wanted to acknowledge some of our listeners today. And John and I were just discussing before we hit record on here that we've got a list of countries, of people listening to us that we're going to say it's rather gratifying. And we want to throw a quick shout out to a few of these listeners in different countries. And naturally, as you would expect, U.S. is at the top of the list, right? USA.
The medal count.
You got that right.
Medal count.
What is the old saying? Back-to-back undefeated World War champions?
Okay.
All right. So, but...
How much bourbon was involved in that take?
All right. So, just going to read a list of countries, really in no particular order regarding, how many folks are listening in each country, but wanted to just go ahead and say that we've got a lot of listeners in Brazil, Ireland, the UK, Canada, Switzerland, South Africa, Russia, France, Turkey, Thailand, Israel, and John, drum roll please, Kyrgyzstan. Yes, Kyrgyzstan. We have, and I will go ahead and say this, we have one listener in Kyrgyzstan.
His name's Borat.
We have 0 listeners in Kyrgyzstan after that. But anyway, just wanted to say hi to everybody. And again, we appreciate you guys listening to the show. We really, really do. And we wanted to go ahead and tell you, we've been promising that we were going to be good guys on this and get the YouTube channel up to snuff. We're about, I'd say, 2/3 of the way there. And if we can tempt you a little bit more, something we're going to do that was requested to us by one of our listeners is we're going to upload a couple of short videos. John's going to do one, and I'm going to do one. And it's going to be a quick explanation in video of some of our chart modifications that we do. It was something that John and I talked about in, I think it was our episode on gig preparation, about how we deal with like rhythm section charts and that sort of thing. So we're each going to do a short video of a couple of charts that we've modified, explain how we do it and why we do it, and let you guys see that. So that'll be up there on the page, the YouTube page. And we did get one email that said, hey, we're having a little trouble accessing a couple of videos. Well, let me explain this to you. When you go to our YouTube page, you will see a listing of headers that go across there. You'll see one tab that says videos and another that says playlists. On the videos tab, if you click on that, that is the actual podcast shows that have been uploaded. Now, if you will click on playlists, playlists are these different lists of videos that are music, or that's different videos of music that John and I talk about in each show. Like it could be videos of great underappreciated drum tracks, underappreciated drummers, the great live albums that we talked about on one of the shows. So you have to click on playlists, and that will get you to some videos that we've talked about on the different shows. Mm-hmm. So I've said it on the show, John, so that means we have to get this done now.
Okay.
So anyway, one last thing before we get on to the show. If you guys recall, we did a podcast, or actually it was a double header. It was a part 1, part 2 podcast on pathways of education. And we were sent a lovely email by one of our listeners saying, hey, there is another route other than going to college and just banging it out on the road. He said, what about the military guys? And it hit me like a ton of bricks, because John and I play with a bunch of retired military guys that did exactly what this guy was saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I was just in denial because the Navy kind of courted me when I was in high school. And I kept saying, hey, do I have to go to basic training? And like, yeah. And I was like, no, I don't want to do that. It's like such a wimp. But I think I blocked out the military option because of that. So I apologize to my many friends who have benefited greatly in so many ways from that.
Man, let me tell you. Yeah, the basic training to me is like loading stuff into my car.
I had it in my mind that it was going to be like officer and a gentleman, and that guy picked on me the whole time or something.
I got no place else to go.
I had plenty of places to go.
Yeah. So
no,
yeah.
Navy person.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I always had the thought in the back of my mind, and I think it was because from like what my dad and some of my uncles used to tell me about the military, is that you would tell them you wanted to be like in the military, some kind of branch as far as like being in the band or something, like then they would just get you in there and put you where you'd end up being an infantryman regardless or something like that, you know. I don't think it works that way anymore.
No, probably not.
Yeah. So anyway, guys, that's it. Just got the perfunctories out of the way here on this. As usual, please stay in touch with us. You can email us at drummersweeklygroovecast@gmail.com. Our Facebook page, facebook.com/drummersweeklygroovecast, and Twitter, and we are at DW Groovecast on Twitter. So for today's main topic, John came up with another gem. And this one is going to it's going to branch off in a few different ways. In other words, we're going to approach this topic from a few different avenues or a few different angles. And so the topic today is embracing strengths and weaknesses of other players. So, John, tell us kind of what was your original concept in thinking about this?
Well, I think we tend to be rather competitive when it comes to this, life we've chosen, and sometimes we can get really distracted by other people's success or other people's abilities. And I just think it's wasted energy in a lot of ways. And it really, I've been guilty of it, so I can speak to it, with authority. But I think that it's best to kind of reevaluate your take on that if you're struggling with it, and looking at things realistically. And it could be anything from, it's just the type of music you like, or you're drawn to a certain type of playing, and you get freaked out about the pressures of what you think you should be doing, and it can just really become a mess in that sense. And maybe it's my whole idea was to encourage everybody to kind of step back and take a look at the picture realistically about where you're at and what you're doing and why. And there could be answers to that, or maybe you can get out of that rut too.
The first thing that you mentioned, as far as like, look, this is one of the more graphic examples of it. Man, it really struck me as something that I think most of us as drummers know and can feel when we're in this situation. And you had mentioned that there are sometimes a divide between guys who kind of they might pride themselves as chops players or really good technicians, versus guys who are just primarily like good, solid groove players and feel players. And it really struck me as far as like, man, you're exactly right. How many times have you either heard somebody either overtly or kind of subtly on either side of that camp? Like, for example, you might have some guy who's like a great technician, and kind of poo-poo somebody who just, plays like real meat and potatoes, and be like, yeah, this guy, he's one of these guys that, he could never really do this gig. It's not, playing the kind of music that I play would be so far above him, and vice versa. Me playing just that kind of music would be so far below me, that sort of thing. And that happens more often, I think, than we want to acknowledge a lot of times.
I would tend to agree. We're talking about ego and psyche and self-worth, and that can bring out a lot of negative things, and justifying this or that. And so yeah, I think some people verbalize it more often than others, but there can be a lot of that going on. And it can be not only, you could be talking bad about someone, and which is not necessarily cool, but sometimes it's just, you can be so hard on yourself too. Why am I not where I'm at? What is going on here? And sometimes you're just lazy.
Well, that's a good point.
That could be part of it, but
yeah, it could be a defense mechanism, so to speak.
Definitely.
Convince yourself.
I know I've gone through periods where I got really depressed. Like, man, why am I? I could have spent more time and had more together, and my hands aren't good, and I could have, a lot more vocabulary and this and that, and really struggled at times, like, where my place in music was, and my worth, and all that. And it took a long time to come to terms with the fact that, quite frankly, for me, it just wasn't something that was important to me. I love songs. I love simple drumming. I always have. Of course, I gravitated towards it, and that's okay. But we get caught up in these games sometimes with what's heralded as cool, or what's heralded as, amazing and worthy of attention, and oftentimes it's chops. But there's some people that I've had someone ask me in the past, like, man, your reputation is you got a pocket, and it's cool, and no one is talking about me like that, and I just, I'm missing something in there, and it's hard to say what that is.
Yeah, well,
But, they get upset about it. And these could be guys that have pretty good hands or have a well-rounded approach and all that, but don't have some magic that they think people should have in their opinion of them.
John, one quick thing about that thing of using an excuse one way or the other as a defense mechanism, it also works against you exactly from the standpoint of what you said there. Like, if we'll take the proverbial chops guy saying, why is my groove not where it needs to be? A lot of times just the thought of that in your head is self-defeating enough from the standpoint of not being able to play groove style music in the way that you want it to be. In other words, it's always in the back of your mind that, hey, this is not my bag. And again, you can flop it around the other way as well. That kind of self-defeating type of behavior, from the groove guy could absolutely prevent him from working on, playing more chops driven or at least technique driven or sophisticated styles of performing.
Yeah, I can speak to that. Just like in the simple act of trading fours on a gig, I'm horribly insecure about it, and oftentimes, to sort of make fun of my own self in that sense, and that right there is just making the problem worse. So there's a lot to be said for what you touched on.
Well, I'll say this. To get to the embracing part of this, as far as like embracing the differences between these two divides here, what you said earlier about finding the joy, or at least finding the reason for why you enjoy or why you have gravitated to being this, that should be enough.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Why is it not enough, right, to be, hey, I'm a groove player. This is what I like. I play for the song. I like music, songs, more than just the aspect of just blowing chops. Why is that not enough, And I think that kind of leads into another great point that you brought up when we were first talking about this, is that we have our little drum societies in communities, right?
Sure.
And these drum societies in communities put pressure, whether it be direct pressure or even subtle subliminal pressures on us, to where, hey, this is the trend of the day. This is the way that it's going. Therefore, to be the hip guy, you need to be like this. Right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's the old supermodel thing. We can't live up to the supermodel hype, so to speak.
No, it's
although you're looking pretty good, John.
Well, thanks, man. I have something to fall back on. My modeling career.
Got that badonk to fall back on. Yeah.
Enough of that horrifying.
That's the first time we said badonk on the podcast.
Nice. It's crazy. Like we're talking about abilities and technique and, style of playing. But man, we're equally in drum society world. We're equally as guilty, just like with gear.
Oh yeah.
And it's really weird to think about how even the most jaded and, I'm pretty jaded when it comes to gear, whatever, I've had it all, this and that. But I still fall prey to, oh, should I have that snare drum or that tom in a snare stand, or should my crashes be bigger, or is my ride too pingy? And you just get so wrapped up in this stuff, and a lot of times you could lose sight of yourself and what it is you do, and maybe, like in our cases, what it is that got us where we're at. Like in on some level, like, no, you do your thing, and if you like a trend, that's one thing, but if you feel pressured by it, that's another.
Yeah, and John, something that we alluded to, I think, on a prior podcast quite a while back, is that there is a weird phenomenon that it's a human thing. It's not just a drummer thing, where there are so many aspects of the gear that we choose, or if we want to go back to these different strengths and weaknesses that we have, whether it be a chops guy, groove guy, that they become part of our personality. And that is like one of the weird things that it's just like, I think what we talked about in the earlier podcast is that some guys will become loyal to certain brands of gear, and I mean loyal to a fault from the standpoint that everything else is just crap.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's because that kind of thing becomes a part of your personality. And to change from that and to be malleable and be open to other things, to them it's being perceived as a weakness. That, hey, I can't stand on my conviction of this stick company, this cymbal company being, this is the best, and I'm standing behind it regardless of, not having any kind of an endorsement deal or whatever, but just being loyal to it. You could probably say the same thing when it comes to these strengths and weaknesses. That, if you're a grooves guy or a chops guy, hey, to be anything other than that is a sign of weakness.
Yeah, that's great insight there. I think the other thing that is pretty prevalent too is like gigs. Guys get a gig and you're like, how did this guy get this gig? Or I don't really see that it's a good fit. Or oh, he's a self-promoter and that's the only reason. I mean, there's a million reasons we may look at someone and say, I don't think he's worthy of that gig and this and that. And it's like, I've kind of been fortunate enough in that I'm old enough and appreciate where I'm at to not get too hung up on that at this point. But man, I mean, I definitely wrestled with that as well. And, I'm using myself as an example, but you have to realize first and foremost that you can't do every gig. So
right,
just chill on that to begin with. And secondly, most of the gigs I've ever gotten had nothing to do with, someone seeing me and just being lit up by my playing. And it was relationships, and it was, recommendations, and it was trust and those kind of things. So you have to factor in, besides the time someone might have put in as a player, well, they might have put in time developing a relationship with the MD of that band, and maybe not even in a calculated way. It
right.
could have just been as we as humans connect, you find people you have common ground with, and man, it led to this gig. But there's a bigger picture than just this guy got this gig and I can't really figure out why. Well, there could be a number of reasons. And it's not doing you any good to be upset about it. What can you do to put yourself in positions to get those type of gigs?
Well, see,
as opposed to wasting energy.
Yeah,
complaining.
That's a great point, because there are so many factors when it comes to, we'll call it like gig jealousy or whatnot, that type thing. There are so many factors for every possible kind of gig that you can either audition for or be in consideration for. And again, when it comes to like either embracing a strength or weakness of these other players, you have to consider the type of gig that it is. Like, for example, if I've been up for a few gigs where I've had to go through an audition process, and part of the actual gig is an on-stage sort of pseudo acting type thing. And man, sometimes those gigs have very little to do with your playing. They've got they actually, I like to say, cast those parts, right? And sometimes you have to go, they're looking for a certain person that looks a certain way, and you have to be careful about, this kind of thing, about this gig jealousy, and think, oh, well, man, this guy, He just got this, whatever, such and certain. Man, you have to give that up, and there are certain aspects of this stuff that you cannot change, and you just have to embrace it and move forward.
Certainly.
And likewise, again, on another type of gig, you could look at the person that successfully got the gig, and again, you could go, oh, well, this guy, I don't know how he ended up getting this gig. He can barely hold sticks, man. This guy's up there just slopping around playing this stuff. Don't these guys know that I played with all these great musicians and jazz players that have come through town? Man, you got to suck that up.
Yeah, I agree.
You got to suck that up, and you got to embrace the reasons for why. And it's an opportunity to learn what this is all about, and let go of what is out of your control. You do the best that you can. You understand, hey, this is it. I got to move forward. You can learn from those abilities, or learn from this actual process. Put it into your quiver of drumming arrows and move forward, so that the next time that it happens, maybe you'll have a little more insight on it. So embrace that.
Cool. Yeah, that's awesome. It really is what you touched on about circumstances being out of your control. I've been involved in some gigs where maybe I had some influence as to who to audition. And, maybe it's a desirable gig and some opportunities in that. But certain people didn't know that you might be dictated in who you choose by the way they look, or what kind of instrument they play, or what, and so, in one case, there was 5 or 6 people that I couldn't even bring into audition because they just didn't look right. Perfectly capable players. And, or they're playing a Paul Reed Smith instead of a Telecaster, or whatever it may be, and catching grief for it. Like, what the hell is going on here, man? You didn't even get me an audition. I can't even be heard. And, I'm not going to say, well, your hairline is not right, or, you're wearing khakis, or, whatever it may be. Your guitar and rig is, not really what they're looking for. And that's a drag on so many levels. But there's a perfect example of something that is, you have no control over. And those things you have to accept, because at the end of the day, oftentimes gigs are about entertainment and image and these things, because the music business is entertainment.
Well, I've said it many times also, that especially when you get to certain levels of this, certain levels of entertainment, that a lot of times the folks that are pulling the strings and writing the paychecks, they pretty much realize that the majority of the ticket buying public listen with their eyes.
Totally. That's very true.
So again, that's just something that should be embraced, and realize that kind of thing is prevalent.
What do you think about kind of just sticking with this whole umbrella of ideas and in embracing strengths and weaknesses? What's your take on the war of musical styles? And I know you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, well,
like jazzers versus rockers, that.
Got to throw in the orchestral players too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
I hate to bring up that cranky bunch, man. They might pick on me too much or something.
Well, if you're a freelance musician, and you're a guy that likes to, or a girl that likes to play a whole bunch of different styles of music. In other words, you studied enough to where you don't really turn down any gigs when the phone rings, you're going to find yourself thrust into a bunch of different gigging opportunities and gigging genres. And so, one night you might play a little, a jazz trio. The next night you might play an 8-piece corporate band, rock band hit. And then the next week you might have a 2-week run at a theater. And so you're going to be, in there with a bunch of different players. And invariably you have folks who like to bag on different genres and different styles. And we'll take one of the first ones you mentioned was like the jazz players versus the rock players. Not all, but a lot of the jazz players have a little bit of a tendency to, I don't want to say look down their nose, but I think maybe a better way to think of it is that it's a fairly well perceived and not incorrect notion that if you can play that style of music, being jazz, you've probably got enough technical facility to play most anything else, especially from the rock genre. Now let me go ahead and say this. Whether that means that it's stylistically correct, that's not the thing. You might have enough technique, but being stylistically and musically correct, maybe not. Okay? Mm-hmm. So a lot of times that's kind of thrown or it's kind of swept under the rug about being musically correct. In other words, they might look down their nose a little bit from the standpoint of like, well, this is a lower art form than mine. Therefore, I have enough technical ability and certainly enough musical capability in my genre. Maybe I can just, throw my horn up on the stage and play in a corporate band. Mm-hmm. It's not always the case. No. It's really not. It's not always the case. And so it's one of those things that if the jazz musician who thinks in that way, if they look at it honestly, and they look at the standpoint of like, hey, rock and roll, funk, it's a whole different vocabulary. And it's a whole different, for that much, language.
Attitude, too.
Attitude as well. And, if you're not well-versed with that and know how to play within that kind of a setting, then that's something that needs to be considered. It absolutely does, because I'm telling you, it just absolutely does not work out. I could have no more authentically played a really good rock pop gig 20 years ago. I just couldn't have done it. It's just because I was so far removed from that at that time by playing just nothing but straight ahead stuff.
But did you sort of have that attitude as well?
I think I did from time to time, from the standpoint of regarding who the players were.
Oh, okay.
I
can understand that.
In other words, if it was just some little, rock bar dive gig, who couldn't do that?
I just had a really bizarre memory.
Yeah.
When we first met, shortly after we first met, we were talking gear, and you said, and this would have been about 20 years ago.
Yeah.
You said, yeah, man, I got this Gretsch USA Custom. I got same time Bill Stewart got his. And
right.
And like
at Modern Drum Shop in New York.
Just talking about the details of it. And, I got this Ricky Rock kit over here, this Yamaha kit, this Ricky Rock kit. Yeah. And I remember, I'm like, you're so far removed from that mindset and attitude that it hit me now, like, you were in that mode a little bit. It was kind of like, that's my rock kit. This is so weird.
Yeah.
And obviously we know people that are just so far gone beyond that in their attitude, it's just incredible.
Man, let me tell you when my thought process changed on that. I can't remember the exact date, but I remember the instance when it happened. I was having lunch during a little jazz brunch kind of a gig. I was playing a little jazz brunch thing. And I was talking to a musician at the table that was not on the gig. He was not on the gig. He was just another guy that had just come in to actually see the gig and to have some food. And I remember him saying, you know, he goes, I like doing jazz, but once you get past a certain number of players on each instrument, he goes, the ability drops tremendously. In other words, you know, you've got like 3 or 4 guys on each instrument that can flat out make some music at a certain level. And then it drops off. But he goes, you know, he goes, when I do my rock and pop stuff, he goes, this freaking town is chocked to the gills, man. He goes, you can go 15 people deep on each instrument, man, and you'll have an amazing experience every single gig.
That's crazy.
Isn't that amazing? And man, it's one of those things, to borrow Marlon Brando from Apocalypse. I think this can be summed up best by a short monologue by Marlon Brando from Apocalypse Now. It hit me like a diamond bullet. And I thought, you know what? That guy's absolutely right. That if you embrace the fact that in every genre of music, there are smoking good players that for that genre of music can take it to an extremely high level. You know, and if you're open to playing those styles of music, man, you can have some fantastic musical experiences.
Yeah, definitely. So if, as a jazz player, what you're saying is, you know, if you get about 4 deep on a bassist in most towns, it's just the monologue would be the horror. The horror. Right?
Absolutely.
I'm just running with the Brando thing.
Yeah, that's good, man. I like that.
They've lost their mind and are sitting in a cave, stuck playing with a bass player who drags. The horror.
Yeah, but that's where my attitude shifted.
Interesting. Well, it I think a lot of it has to do with maturity, but it also has to do with you can get stuck in a bubble with like-minded people, and it's difficult to get out of that headspace too. You know, where that kind of thing. You know, like your surrounding can dictate a lot of your take on different styles and different players too.
And I want to take just a second and lob that hand grenade over toward the orchestral players for a second, because let me tell you,
look out.
Yeah, that is absolutely the case with guys and ladies being within their peer groups, you know, and in those orchestras. Let me tell you, man, I've played drum set on a lot of pops orchestras. Mm-hmm. And most of the full-time orchestras, I'm not going to say the orchestras, but there's only one full-time orchestra in this town. Those players circle on their calendars where those pops concerts are and sub those suckers out.
No kidding.
Yes, they do.
Just can't take it.
Yeah. The majority of the time when I've played with these orchestras, it's about half orchestra players, maybe a little more. I'm going to say a little more than half, and then the other half are their first call subs that come in and play them. And they even have sub conductors.
Wow.
Yeah, it's not the main music director and conductor that does those shows. It's a different conductor, and you know, again, let's just call it what it is, man. A lot of these guys just don't like doing it. It's not, they somewhat look down on that genre of music. They don't like it when they have a drum set player sitting back there behind them. They put up the plastic, you know, the clear sonic shields.
Yeah.
Like to complain about it.
Man.
Like to complain that the drummer's actually playing on time and not half a measure behind, like the string players like to do. I'm saying that right up front, because there's no string players listening to this.
No. You know,
there's not an ictus between me and Europe.
Not to get too spiritual, but I think this is proof God exists. He's never put me on a gig like that. And I want to make sure I make it perfectly clear how much I love him for that.
Yeah. I actually, man, I kind of like doing those gigs. I kind of like.
Awesome. We have no conflicts whatsoever.
You know,
then.
well, and it's because
no competition.
I can pretty much do whatever I want on those gigs, and nobody cares, man.
That's a good point.
But now let me say this though: have you ever been invited to, or have you ever been a part of like an orchestral, like an after show, like a party or anything like that, or anything any kind of a get together that orchestral musicians?
No, they're too concerned about their property value to come in there.
Yeah. Well, you can absolutely. If there was a Las Vegas odds maker in a like a booking thing, you know, for odds on gambling on this, bet every penny that you've got that when you walk into that house or to wherever they're playing, that they're going to be playing Beatles music. That's the only like rock band they'll like accept. Respect.
Interesting.
Every get together that I've been at that was hosted by like an orchestral person, you know, a player, they're into the Beatles. I think it's called Eleanor Rigby, you know.
Hey,
strings.
I'm down with any orchestral party if that's what they're playing. I'll show up and shut up.
They didn't particularly like it though when I suggested they played some White Snake.
Well, I mean, that now you're just kind of being discriminatory, and I don't know hardly any musician's party that wants to hear that.
Dude, Tommy Aldridge played on some of that stuff.
Okay.
Come on, man.
I don't want to hear it at a party.
And you know, another thing, again, a lot of orchestral players got no use for jazz.
You know what though, man? A jazz player is getting bullets shot at him all night. It's coming from all angles. These orchestral players, man, they get 32 bars to think about what they're going to play. So chill, man. You guys get time to get psyched up to play that press roll.
Do you remember that whole show?
Just relax.
Point counterpoint. Let me tell you the response from the orchestral side.
Uh-oh.
It's one of two things. One, you guys are just doing a bunch of oodling over there. Oodling. And then the second thing is this: you guys aren't really improvising. You go into a practice room and practice all your licks, and then you come in there and then you just play the licks you've been practicing over there. Regurgitate your licks. So there's the orchestral side. See, we service all different communities here on this show.
Too funny.
But you know, the overall thing. Okay, we've talked about the divide now. We need to talk about the embracing part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Again, you have to, when you're talking about, let's use a really graphic example. The jazz folks and the orchestral people need to have a community hug, because let me tell you, again, if you look at just the overall state of where those two genres of music stand in our society, those two different types of music, straight ahead jazz and orchestral music, both of them together make up, I think the last time I saw it was like maybe 2.8% of all record sales. You know, I mean, those two communities need to absolutely have a love fest, you know, and respect each other for what they are.
Yeah.
You know?
Committed, and yeah, that's for sure, man. It's it's something that I just think it's wasted energy, man. You know, I mean, if you're into your thing and you're playing with a major symphony and you're getting paid well, it's just be happy about that. If you're a jazz musician and you actually are playing jazz and sustaining this lifestyle, that's hard to do. Just don't waste your time, you know, railing other people. Just be like, I can't believe I get to do this. This is great.
Yeah, I mean, both sets of musicians in those respective genres, if you're playing at any kind of a level at all, you absolutely have facility, technique, and good musical, you know, you've got good musical chops behind you to be able to do that. So there should absolutely be significant love on both sides of that. One of the only ones that I'm aware that we can know just by name that respects that both sides of that is, you know, Wynton Marsalis, of course, the great trumpeter. He's got fantastic orchestral chops as well as, you know, a legendary jazz musician. So
yeah,
Yeah.
There's a number of people that can straddle that. We know a couple personally that
Yeah.
are adept at that and do it. So kind of along those lines, another interesting one that rears its ugly head is that, low paying creative gigs versus high paying, wedding and that kind of thing. And there can be a real divide amongst players in that sense. And
Yeah, John, if you got a $400 one-night gig, you've sold out, man. You're a musical prostitute.
oftentimes that's true, but sometimes it is, for example, in my case, that's really what I do best. And fortunately, the compensation is pretty nice, and that's just a win-win in my book. But I do run across a tinge of, jealousy on occasion when someone gets to do a full-out creative gig. But it's usually less because they get to play what they want or be really creative, and it's more about sometimes I just can't afford to do it.
Right. Well, let me tell you, if you want a little ammo to make the starving artist who poo-poos the higher paying gig to give you some respect, and this is the truth, and you know this, and anybody who does this sort of work that plays these higher paying corporate style gigs where you have to play a variety of different genres of music, all you have to say is this: is during the 3 or 4 hours that you do that job, if you play those different styles and that different styles of music and songs authentically, that's one of the most difficult gigs you're ever going to have from a musical standpoint, regardless if you're just playing 1 and 3 on the kick, 2 and 4 on the snare drum. If you do it well and you do it authentically to each song, man, that is an incredibly demanding gig. If you have to start out at the beginning of the night, you're playing standards with brushes. If you know the vocabulary and play it correctly, that's one thing. And then if you have to start jumping into maybe doing some light R&B, light, pop stuff, playing that authentically. And then when you get into other styles or different louder genres or dance sets, style stuff, you have to pull from the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and then last week. And man, to be able to cross all those lines and play them authentically, that should be, embraced by anybody.
Yeah, I just don't think that's going to happen, and that's okay. But man, I have some friends that do creative gigs more often than not, and but there one thing that needs to be really, sometimes it's like the elephant in the room is individual circumstances.
Yeah.
Like a guy who is committed to playing creative music and, doesn't pay much. Well, he may have completely fashioned his life to be able to do that.
Right.
And man, that's awesome. And that's incredible and commendable. And I wish anybody that opportunity if that's what they want to do. But then, it could be like that guy might be crapping on some dude who's playing in a corporate band or something like that. Well, maybe, who knows? You don't know what's going on. Maybe he has to do that. His parents are, to a point where they can't take care of themselves and they didn't plan well for that.
Right.
Those responsibilities have been put on that person's shoulders, or some adoption issues, or whatever it may be. There could be circumstances above and beyond just, oh, you're a whore who wants money. That maybe you're a really stand-up individual who needs money.
Yeah.
So there's some different things like that, and as far as sometimes to turn it around, the person who's doing really well and making money, like, man, I'm not going to go play for $50.
Right.
That's just, well, you know what, man? You don't have to.
Mm-hmm.
Thank God you are doing some gigs that you feel you're compensated fairly for, or that it's worth your time. But that's not your place to say that someone else shouldn't do that if they want to.
Right. That all goes back also to one of the kind of global points that we've made, is that regardless of the genre of music that you play, you know, you need to find the joy in it, and hopefully also you can find the opposing side's reason for the joy as well in that.
Yeah.
You know, I totally understand it. If you're an orchestral player and let's say you just don't see any, and you've tried it and you don't see any, or don't find any joy in, you know, going out and playing a jazz gig or going out and playing like a rock or pop gig for a wedding reception.
Don't do it.
Don't do it. But then again, don't poo-poo the other people.
Yeah. I think sometimes we lose sight of the fact that, and, you know, the ever popular, in America, they don't support arts mindset and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Well, you know, there's some truth to that, in that most of us that are playing music for a living have run across and battled well, you know, you need something to fall back on, or you know, when you're done living out your little fantasy and you want to grow up and do this and that, and yeah, man, let's remember that and stick together and support each other. Just in that we've all kind of run across some, you know, people pushing back like, oh, you know, that's not a viable option for a life and a career, and you know, so. No matter what somebody's approach is, I give them a pat on the back and say, yo, knock it out, do your thing. Because there's plenty of people that are going to just be kind of unsupportive of all that.
Oh yeah, you've absolutely got enough outside pressures from other people, you know, that will tear you down. Much less you don't need other musicians that eat their young, you know, so to speak. And you know, that's the next thing that we were going to talk about, is you have to be cognizant of young musicians versus older musicians. You know, those guys back and forth, a lot of times they spew a lot of hate back and forth towards each other, but they need to also, again, be able to embrace and, you know, the strengths and weaknesses of each one. Because I mean, you know, you could have the young guy sitting there talking about, what's this old relic? He's not relevant anymore. He doesn't have anything to, you know, he doesn't have anything to say. And likewise, you can turn it right back around and have an older veteran person going, this young buck, you know, he only knows what was current yesterday. Mm-hmm. He doesn't know anything about the history or the roots or anything that I've actually experienced in my playing career. And that's something that you know, it's prevalent in a lot of different genres. Seems like it's really bad in the jazz genre a lot of times.
No, I think in the rock and pop thing too.
Yeah.
What is this? You know, like that whole. And I'm guilty of this on occasion, but you know, modern pop music. What is this nonsense? You know, and we can be, as the elder statesmen, sometimes we can be pretty flippant and pretty dismissive to you know, the trends of the young, and you know, embracing technology, or you know, whatever that may be, and it's sort of a sad state, and I try to stay out of that. On occasion, I get annoyed by, you know, I might have learned 4 new pop songs that literally you could place the drum track from one right into the other, and what's hot and popular and all that. But man, it is what it is, and I've always like, you know, when I started doing more recording, I was kind of hired more because it was a little loose and it was a little rootsier in approach or whatever, and that sort of was working, and people were embracing that, and you know, that trend kind of comes and goes, and it's easy to get caught up in that, like, oh, you know, everybody plays this vibe right now or the style right now, and it's just not my thing. You have to really look at that as, your security in yourself. Do what you do, and don't waste your time, like you said, eating the young, man. It's like music is always going to evolve. If you don't accept that, you're just setting yourself up for misery.
Well,
so don't.
Yeah, I mean, every topic that we talked about inside of this show today has got relevance, on each side.
Absolutely.
And so we hope that what we've done is make you aware of some things that you either A, were not aware of, or B, you might have been sort of subconsciously aware of it. And if you can, think about these things, come to terms with them, and then embrace both sides of the argument, chances are a lot of the darkness that, surrounds a lot of musicians, you can overcome that. And I mean, let me tell you, there's a lot of dark folks in our business.
Yeah.
And, when you start trying to fight reality of these different, the different realities that we talked about here, boy, there's no better way to buy a ticket to, absolute misery than that.
That's very true. And, I can speak to both sides of that too. Like, getting lost in that darkness you speak of, it can just escalate into a number of problems. I think it affects your playing, but it affects your relationships, which in turn affects your ability to get work, all of these things. And it's like, man, this stuff is hard enough. Let's not make it more difficult. And I say that not in any judgmental way, because, man, in 2 days I might be in a mood that is not commendable, like it's it's part of the creatives. Often part of creatives, world is your mood swings and all that, but just try to navigate through that stuff and see positives. And I promise you, it does. It reflects in your playing. It reflects in your, communication, all of that. And don't let it become an albatross around your neck.
Well said. Well said. So, guys, we'll love to hear your comments and like to hear your ideas about what we talked about. So, feel free to give us an email. We're going to finish up the show now. We've got our segment this week of great underappreciated drum tracks. And John, do you want to go first today, or?
I'd love to.
All right. What you got?
I not long ago heard the NRBQ version of Shake, Rattle, and Roll. And that's a band that just is near and dear to my heart for a lot of reasons. But the drummer, Tom Ardolino, is just stunningly cool and so uniquely himself. And the thing about this track I like is it just swings like nobody's business, but there's this looseness to it. There's that kind of like shuffle against eighth note fill sort of vibe going on.
The old wagon with one square wheel.
Yes, and he's kind of the king of that in the really aggressive sense. We're probably, most of us are well versed in the Keltners and the who's another good example of some of the Memphis guys that did the early rock and roll stuff. Mm-hmm. Jerry Lee Lewis, a perfect example. His
drummer over there.
Earl Palmer is great at that.
J.M. Van Eaton.
Yeah, he did a lot of that stuff. Yeah, it's a little more, a little tamer and just kind of locked down and swinging. But Tom's sort of like I always kind of envision him like if John Bonham were playing with Carl Perkins, Yeah. He's kind of got that sort of thing. And the version I love is off a live record called God Bless Us All. And an addendum to that, there's also in their cover mode, which they always do these amazing covers of old rootsy tunes. There's a version of Johnny Cash's "Get Rhythm" on that record that is just stunningly good too. And Tom is just driving that train, man. He's an incredible drummer. That's an incredible track. So that kind of gave you a 2-for-1 there in that 2 tracks, but
Yeah.
Great underappreciated tracks and an underappreciated drummer as well. NRBQ, Become a Believer.
Man, I've got some friends that are gonna love you long time for that, man. I got some NRBQ buddies for sure.
And they're out there, rabid fans.
Well, I'm gonna go about as far in the opposite direction of that you can. I'm gonna talk about a track that this album probably sold about 14 copies. Yeah. It's a record from back in 1991. The artist is Steve Coleman and 5 Elements, and the drummer is the wonderful Marvin Smitty Smith. The album, which you could almost say the entire album is unique and one of a kind, and just I mean, Smitty Smith is out of his mind on this record. The album is called Black Science, and the track in particular that I want to talk about is called Black Phonemics. And I'm going to, and John will as well, post our respective videos on the YouTube channel for you to check out. Someone was nice enough to rip one of the 14 copies of that CD that was made available and made a video of it on YouTube. So
nice.
You can check it out there. But I'll never forget when I first got access to this disc back, in 91. Listening to it, man, it just absolutely blew my mind because I knew Smitty Smith from more of a mainstream contemporary jazz type thing. He had his records like Keeper of the Drums, and he played as a sideman on a lot of other records. But I never knew him from this style of music, which is kind of an abstract fusion kind of a record. And it's going to be nearly impossible and futile for me to explain kind of what happens here, but the 30-second explanation of what happens on this is Steve Coleman is an absolute genius composer and arranger. And he wrote a style of music that sounds abstract and almost random, almost out of time, but yet the music is thoroughly and completely composed down to the exact drum part that Smitty Smith is playing on a lot of these tracks. And when you first listen to it, it's going to sound like he's just kind of improvising these bizarre grooves and these different types of rhythms that just kind of seem haphazard and random, but it's not. This stuff is totally written out, and it just happens. It's almost like a 12-tone composer that they put these random instruments within the drum set: cowbell, snare drum, splash cymbals, rack toms, bass drum, hi-hat notes, bells, cymbal, bell notes and stuff into these different complicated rhythms that seem random again, but they kind of resolve and repeat every 2 to 4 bars. And after you listen to it for a little while, you can kind of pick up on this. So there's the explanation on it. It is an absolute brain twister, and on top of that, the music is good. Let me say, this is not some superfluous, chops laden, it's weird and I like it just because it's weird. It's not that. It's actually very, very well done. The music is so unique and wonderfully composed and arranged and played that it's absolutely worth your time to check out. So once again, that's Smitty Smith. He is on Black Science by Steve Coleman and 5 Elements. How'd you like for that dramatic pause?
That was rare and kind of cool.
Man, they used to say in the radio business, no dead air, ever.
Well, we should have been in the radio business.
All right, guys. Well, that's it. That's it for this week. I'm going to go ahead and let the cat out of the bag and say we're getting ready to do our first interview, but we're not going to tell you who it is.
No way.
It's going to be good, though. You're going to absolutely want to tune in for it. So anyway, John, do you have anything else you want to say?
Go tell a jazz musician playing a $50 gig you love them.
I'll accept that, and it meant even more to me that he got closer to the microphone and lowered his tone. It was like he was whispering to you guys.
Do it.
All right, guys, that's it for this week. Please tell your friends about us. Shoot us an email. We're at drummersweeklygroovecast@gmail.com. Go to facebook.com/drummersweeklygroovecast and at Twitter at DWGroovecast. All right, that's it. Until next time, we will see you later.
Keep it on the one.